Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. Today I have a super easy resin casting project for you. So if you're a beginner with resin and you want a foolproof way of making something beautiful yet simple, this is the video for you. I will be using resin and the snail mould from Let's Resin, along with some artificial flowers to give it that instant beauty. If that sounds like fun, stay tuned and enjoy the video. The resin I chose to use today is Let's Resin's Deep Pour Epoxy Resin. It's a 2:1 ratio, and here you can see I've measured 200 millilitres of part A and 100 millilitres of part B. If you don't have any deep pour resin, you can use regular epoxy resin, but you will need to do it in 2 or maybe 3 layers. After measuring out my resin, I put it into my resin preheater from Let's Resin just for a little while. When you're using deep pour resin, you don't really need to preheat it, but my room was very cold, so I thought I would be on the safe side and just warm it up a little bit. And here's my snail mould from Let's Resin. As I said in the introduction, I'm going to be using artificial flowers today. These are fabric flowers and they're really pretty. You may have seen me use these quite a lot recently because I bought quite a lot of them and I'm trying to use them as much as I can. The reason I love them is because they're so robust and they're not going to tear or damage or break when you're really handling them inside the mould and pushing them around so much as I will be doing today. So I like them because of the strength. Of course, nothing ever matches real flowers, but these do work really well. After selecting the flowers I wanted to use, it was time to mix up my resin. So I poured it all into a silicone pot and gave it a really good mix. One thing I love about deep pour resin is you don't need to worry about bubbles because it takes about 3 to 4 days to fully cure in this temperature that it is here anyway. In warmer climates it will cure quicker, but here it took 3 to 4 days to cure fully. And yeah, the great thing about that is all those bubbles in there have lots of time to find their way up to the top, and so you end up with a very clear finished result. I would normally use my electric automatic stand mixer from Let's Resin for doing the mixing, but I've managed to break mine. Don't ask. I've managed to break it though. Anyway, I've got a new one coming, thank goodness, because I love it to bits. So for today, I'm doing it the old-fashioned way and mixing by hand. So this mould has 2 little snail tentacles in there, and they're the bits where you really need to make sure you get the resin in there. So before I do anything, I'm just pouring a little bit of resin into the head area and squeezing the area of the mould where the tentacles are, just to make sure there's no trapped air or bubbles in there. Right, let's start adding some flowers and some resin. It's going to get messy. Do make sure you protect your work surface. I've got a big silicone mat on my work surface. I decided to dip my flowers into my resin before adding them to the mould. I don't think it's essential. I just wanted to try it out. I thought it would be better to completely saturate the flowers first to avoid having any pockets of air trapped in there. I don't know, maybe it's not necessary, I just wanted to try it. I was also trying to position that flower so that it was central in the detailed side of the shell. It didn't quite get into the position I wanted it to be, but it's hard to see what you're doing when you're working inside the mould like this. On the other side of the shell, I wanted to have that beautiful bright pink poppy. So here I am again, just immersing it in the resin and placing it at the other side. And as you can see, it's beginning to be a bit of a tight squeeze in there, but not to worry. I wasn't too worried how it would turn out because I knew all those beautiful colours would look good, even if I didn't get the position of the flowers quite how I wanted them. And so you can see that I'm packing it very tightly. There's a lot more to go in yet. And because there's going to be so much in there, there's also going to be a lot of pockets of air. And that is another reason why it's so important, I think, to use deep pour resin for this. I would definitely recommend it. Like I said before, you could use regular if you want to, but if you're using the deep pour resin, all those bits of air that will be trapped in those nooks and crannies have plenty of time to find their way out, and I was quite confident that the finished result would be nice and clear. So once all the big bits were in, it became a lot easier. I filled up the rest of the cavities with little flowers. I tried to get that little pink daisy-like flower in the head. And yeah, I love these blue ones. I think the blue ones are my favourites. So yeah, I just filled it up as much as I could, trying to imagine what would be seen from the outside and making sure that the heads of the flowers were positioned so you could see them nicely from the outside. And I made sure I got as much foliage in there as well, because that green really sets off the rest of the colours, I think, anyway. Once all the flowers and foliage were in place, it was time to fill it up with the deep pour resin. I did it a little bit at a time. I kept giving the mould a bit of a squeeze and the flowers a bit of a push around, just to dislodge any pockets of air that might be trapped in there, and then filled it up as far as I could go to the top. And because I didn't want everything floating to the top and sticking out the surface of the resin, I took a sheet of acetate. So you could use something similar to it. It doesn't have to be acetate. You might have some plastic packaging that you've saved. It needs to be something non-porous that can easily peel off afterwards. So yeah, I took the sheet of acetate, put it on the top, then found something a little bit stiffer and harder to put over the top of that. And then if you really want to, you can put something on top of that to weigh it down. Not too heavy, you don't want to distort the mould, but just something to keep it weighed down so the foliage doesn't pop out the top of the resin. So after about 2.5 days, something like that, it was time to take off the acetate. I don't know if you can tell, but it's still a little bit sticky. It's not coming off smoothly, and that's because it's not quite fully cured just yet. So what I wanted to do was just take that acetate off, trim away any leaves that were protruding out the top, and then fill it up with epoxy resin, just the regular epoxy from Let's Resin, and then leave it until the next day. And in that time, I knew that the deep pour resin would be finished curing, and so would my top layer of the epoxy resin. I didn't use very much of the regular epoxy resin. It's just that it was a bit rough there, as you can see on that top surface. It just needed filling up just a little bit, and then it would be nice and smooth. What I would say though is, if you've bought deep pour resin to do this and you've only got deep pour resin, I wouldn't recommend using deep pour resin as a shallow pour. It will take days and days and days and days and days and days to cure. If you're pouring deep pour resin in a shallow layer like this, I would never recommend you do that. So here we are the next day, and yeah, it's ready to get out the mould. The only thing is, it's a long time since I've used this snail mould, and it took me a while to remember the best way for demoulding, but I got there in the end. I will speed up a little bit just because it did take me a little while. I will give you a proper look at it very, very soon. But before that, I just wanted to give it a pair of eyes. And so I decided to do it a little bit differently. Normally, I would put some little glass eyes inside the mould, but it's a very tricky process. And I wanted to try it this way. I just took my Dremel and sanded the area on the front of the tentacle flat so that I could attach my eye to it. So I did that on both of the tentacles, and then I used UV resin to attach it in place. I used Let's Resin's hard type UV resin. I just squeezed out a drop there, as you can see, on some scrap shiny backing paper, which works quite well as a palette. Then I'm taking a micro brush, adding a little bit of the UV resin where I want to stick the eye. Then all I needed to do was put the eye into place and use my UV lamp to cure it from the other side. And then I did the same thing for the other eye. Obviously, this is optional. You don't even need to put eyes on. I think it looked really good without them. I just think it gives it a little bit more character. And these eyes I got from Amazon. I think they were called amphibian glass eyes. I think they're about 3mm, or are they 5? I'm not sure. Anyway, they look quite good, don't they? When the eyes were secured in place, I thought they looked a little bit like they were sticking out a bit. I don't think I'd sanded enough off of the tentacles, and so they were really protruding and it all looked a little bit obvious. So what I'm doing is I'm using some more of the UV resin and just placing it around the eyes just to help them all to blend in so that the join area wasn't quite so noticeable, and then it was a lot better. So let's have a look at it fully finished. To show you it from all sides, I put it onto my electric turntable, which happens to have a light in the middle. And I have to say, doesn't that light make a difference? I was really pleased about that. It made me think that this would look really good if you placed it onto an LED light base for display, because it just looks so magical with the light in those flowers. I really love this snail mould. Look at all the detail, those fine lines in the shell and on the body of the snail. It really is quite realistic, and I think it works so well. You might have noticed that the position of my flower wasn't quite how I wanted it. You know, the main one, it had moved a little bit, but it's unavoidable really. When you're shoving everything in there, things are going to move, aren't they? And the same with the poppy. You can't really see the centre of it. It folded over on itself a little bit, but I'm still really happy with it. My favourite is still the blue area. I love those blue flowers. So I hope this video has inspired you and given you some useful information. I know when you first start with resin, it can be a bit daunting and you can be quite scared of making mistakes and making it all go wrong. You will make mistakes. I've made loads of mistakes with resin, and it's just one of those things, unfortunately. You've just got to be brave and go for it, and the successes make it all worth the trial and effort. If you're interested in any of the Let's Resin products I've used today, all the links will be in the video description along with discount codes. If you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to, and I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.